Hey, Pritesh. Hey, Brandon.
Hello, hello. I think Marina might just be a minute late. Our last meeting was running a little long.
How did the security one go? I think Ava was presenting hit bombs or something.
Yeah, it was interesting. Went through a good bit of discussion there. So be curious to see how that plays out. They just, if it all goes ideally, it'll just be another annotation that gets tacked into the image and gets signed by notary. And so it just works the whole process the way we'd like it to.
Yeah, that is cool. What I was trying to figure out is whether it gets signed on the original manifest. Sorry, it goes on the original manifest, or it's an additional, like an art, kind of like the signatures are and S bombs are. That was the part that I didn't see.
Yeah, I feel like the design they're working with just has it going as an annotation right on your image. And so as you build your image, you just tack that annotation right in there. And that fits really nicely with pretty much every tool out there.
Gotcha.
As long as you can get a tool that makes annotations, which, not there today, but that's not a hard challenge to solve.
Yeah, this is part of the whole, we're just filling while others are joining. This is part of the whole metadata services stuff, as I've been trying to get more thought around, we've got labels, we've got annotations, and I'd love to see name value pairs, just set so you don't have to necessarily submit a document. And then what is the expectation on indexing all of that so that you can actually, it's not just as simple as, hey, I want to get, and what are the properties on a particular artifact out of a registry? Because it's interesting, but I can figure that out myself. It's give me all the artifacts that match certain criteria.
Yeah,
that's a bigger one.
Yeah, that's gonna be a challenge. The stuff I've been looking at on my side is just how do you take the normal build process we have today that just tags a bunch of labels into the image and say, be nice if you just had a little simple command, just take all those labels and just shove them all over the annotations. Because there's a lot of stuff that's looking for the annotation. Yeah. And that's something that I can easily do. That'll probably show up in another, whenever I get some more free time reg client, which there's been a lot of requests over there. So it's keeping me busy these days.
Is reg client just something you're doing personally? Is it under something? Okay.
Nope, completely personal side project in addition to another one that just popped up the other day. So got a couple of these that just on my free weeks here, which I'm in the middle of right now. It's just when I say, let's go ahead and churn out a bunch of fun code to do things that are needed in the industry.
Because one of the things we've been talking about is we need to improve the ORAS authentication paths. And I know you've invested some stuff there. So
yeah, I've done a little bit. Some of it leans a little bit on the Docker because I'll pull in, if you've got the Docker credentials already there, I just pull those directly in. And
so you're dependent on the Docker libraries for the Docker credential store, or?
I'm not dependent on it, but I'll use it if it's there. And so that is an additional authentication just to make the user workflow easier. If you've already logged in a Docker, why make you log in a second time?
I love that. I think the Helm client still uses that, but what we're trying to do is have something that isn't dependent on the Docker libraries for things like WASM or S-bombs, or even notary signatures for S-bombs. Like I shouldn't have to use the Docker libraries per se, because it's specific to the container image. So we're trying to abstract those out. So I don't know if that's something you're interested in helping with. It'd be
it would be interesting. I'm getting Marina on a DM here if she's not going to show. So make sure that she knows that she's missing her own meeting. But yeah, that would make sense to get something abstracted in there. And I think there was some concern about trying to pull in all the external credential helpers, that part it felt like the least difficult of all to me. The bigger challenge to me is weird things I'll run into with, for example, if I'm doing a push to Google, I ran into this issue recently on their artifact repository. You do a pull and it gives you one header that says, here's your request to do a pull request. If you then turn around and you want to do the authentication to do a push, do you need to re-authenticate? Can you use the old authentication? Usually you would just, I've already been talking to this.
Yeah.
I've already been talking to this, just keep reusing the same token and it'll tell me if it's wrong. And it'll just say, hey, request a new token. And the Google method of saying it's wrong didn't follow quite there. There she is.
Sorry,
Oh,
my
you follow up
at
later.
the wrong time.
No, I already gave him the heads up that our last meeting was running over and you'd probably be a few minutes late. So I had you cleared.
All right, very cool. Sorry about that. Where do you want to do, the first thing I had written down is where do we want to do like notes, agenda stuff for this? Do you want to do it in the same doc, or I think that might get confusing? Should I make a new HackMD? I don't know. I was thinking of making a new one, but I just wanted to run that by people, see which would be less confusing.
I'm fine with a separate one.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I will work on that.
We could cross-link the two or something. So
yeah, so maybe put them at the top just to make it clear that they're semi-related. Okay, cool. Then, since we don't have that though, I will just have to send links in the chat, which is gonna be confusing. Okay,
did you
so
create one? Right, because
no, oh, I can do that really fast first.
if you just take the other one, just copy paste and delete everything in the center. Like there's like a template at the bottom you can use, and obviously whatever you'd like to do. But
yeah, I think it'd be easiest if we have one of those for this. So
even as owning the Zoom meeting, I haven't figured out how to maintain the notes. So that's why I'm always saying, please don't put notes in that session because they're gone.
Makes a lot of sense. Let me see. All right, this is going to be bare bones for the moment, but can you guys see that?
The link, and then let's see. Yeah,
I had written down as an agenda. Of course, is not okay. And feel free to add other things in and around there. These are just my first thoughts about what to talk about. And yeah. So the first one is
Tug Notary. Did we switch it to a tugboat?
I don't know. Maybe the first thing we should talk about is a name.
No, I just put it says TUG.
Oh, did I? I think it was autocorrect on. Thanks.
It's collaboration, Steve. You can go in there and fix that.
Actually, it's true. I could. It was more fun just to have some laughter.
I don't know. Maybe it's a good pun. We can do something with that. Okay. Issues. Here it is. So. Okay, I added a link in the agenda here. This is basically just a list of thoughts, complaints, I don't know exactly what to call them, that have come up around TUF that I tried to include as many of as I remember and could find. Probably not an exhaustive list. So I figured this would just be a good place to start and see what work we have to do. I think that some of the things on this list have been addressed in some of the work, but I think they're at least worth discussing because I know they've come up more recently and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So I think like discussion wise, I think this is at least a start, and again, feel free to add things here to like technical things we need to discuss in order to make some progress here. So I figure we can kind of do like two parallel efforts, one to address these problems, obviously, figure out what and if we need to change to make these things work, how we can incorporate with other efforts, all those kinds of things. And then at the same time, look at the pieces that aren't on this list, the things that will work kind of as is, and get started on implementing those pieces so that we can then make progress, get this whole thing working. Any thoughts, comments? I know that I just threw this list at you because I didn't have the notes ahead of time, so.
Yeah, and I looked over this and I didn't have any big issues with it. My questions that I want to try to solve out of this is kind of twofold. One is, what stuff does Notary a Day expect to be within the Notary, and which of those things can we push out to the registry efficiently? And so,
Yeah, maybe that's a
separating
good
the server from the storage.
discussion is like kind of like overall goals, scope kind of thing for this piece of it. Yeah, where it falls in the server, the client, the whatever. Because I know, I think that it always, I think in my opinion, makes sense to start with like the server side stuff when it comes to, signing stuff in general, because it's hard to verify anything until you have stuff to verify. But the question is whether that verification is then also a part of this project, or if that's, passed down to whoever's writing those implementations.
There you just took my second question, which was, okay, now if we have the stuff, we've split apart what needs to be on like a standalone server versus upload to a registry. How do we integrate this in with signing the actual artifacts themselves? What are we putting in there? What is the target that we're signing? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's actually one of the, I don't know if I put that on this list, but I think I did, but one of the early things I think we can address, because I do think that targets metadata in TUF is kind of the least controversial piece to try and get working. I think the snapshot timestamp stuff will take some, there's some stuff that we actually have to work on there. But the targets hierarchy piece of it, I think is a little bit more straightforward and updates less often and all of those things. But the challenge is TUF kind of assumes a package manager naming model, which maps pretty well to tags and to like, the repositories versus the registry piece, but it doesn't map very well to hashes versus like, because names make more semantic sense than hashes to us and to computers, because hashes are random-ish by nature.
It's related to the sequential concept, the ordering of a version, as opposed to.
This has to do with the way that targets metadata delegates to images. I think that, especially after the discussion yesterday in the other Notary meeting, I think what I would be leaning towards is having targets delegate down to the repository level on a registry, and then everything within the repository level we say is the same namespace and so uses the same targets metadata, which I know has some downsides because it doesn't allow the further delineation, but it does mean that you can pull by a hash within a repository and then be able to find the metadata piece for that. I don't know if that
does that limit the ability to have different signed content in the same repository?
No. It just means that it would have to, it would all end up in the same targets metadata within the repository. So the registry could delegate to, different repositories. You can even delegate to groups of repositories and then sub-delegate from there. But I don't think I'm explaining this very well. I need like a whiteboard. Apologies.
Yeah. I have been thinking about that in terms of, especially when you get into snapshots, the more you can make this stuff, the timestamps, I should say, the more you can get this to be just a single timestamp encompassing a whole organization, the more this stuff scales. And so does it make sense to have a repository pointing to a different repository kind of thing, some kind of linking method in there of saying, okay, we're signing, to pull the example from yesterday, the Nginx image, but the Nginx just says, hey, my TUF parent is actually over here in the Docker lab repo, some other place to look at.
Yeah. Wait, so which part? Sorry, the pulling it from.
I'm just thinking a way to somehow have some kind of hierarchical organization that says, this is my organization that I belong to. And so we're not tied to a registry. We're not tied to a repository, but we kind of have some quasi intermediate place. And then how do you make that pointer in there saying this registry is, or this repository is associated with this organization, and where to go look for it?
Because that would be, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I don't think that, the trust relationships necessarily map to the registry ones. I think my like idea would be that it would, you could start like at the high level at wherever you want, but you would end with basically you're delegating trust to a collection or a single repository rather than to a collection or a single image, if that makes sense, because you can always name the repository, whereas it's hard to always be able to name, because like kind of what we were talking about yesterday, where you don't really want to just have a list of hashes that you trust this key to be used for, because every time a new image is published that they sign, you then have to update the list of hashes that is trusted. I mean, it seems a little bit circular.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
Yeah, so I think that basically my only argument really is that the solution is not to list all of the hashes that you should use a key for. I think that there are other options. I just don't think that that one makes a lot of sense.
So I just want to go back to the hierarchy thing, because this is the piece that I keep struggling with, of the location in a registry versus the hierarchy of keys. So like if we could establish a hierarchy of keys, then does it matter where it happens to be stored in a hierarchy of a registry? In other words, if I copy, I'm trying to find a better example, but if I have a root Microsoft cert, and then from the root, there is Office.net and the upstream stuff. I don't know. That's not a good example. Some project that Microsoft ships. But the point, those are all peers of a root. And maybe within Office, there's PowerPoint, Word, I don't know, maybe there's Dynamics and the Office suite. Let's just use that. So now you have three. You have the root, Office, and then a suite of products.
Yeah.
If we did it more that way, then it doesn't matter where any one of those images is stored in any registry at one time, because you can still get the hierarchy that what I think, Brandon, you're shooting for. But it doesn't matter if the way it was stored on MCR versus where I pull it into my registry for my company, because I can still delegate what I want to trust.
Yeah, I think the question is discovery. So, and this is definitely something that we can figure out. The way that TUF currently assumes you discover the keys is that you start with the root you want to use, and then you say, okay, what is the key for this image? And then that gives you another thing. And that might further delegate to another thing for the particular image you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And in the end, you find a particular key, which is associated with a particular targets file, which then gives you the hash and signature, whatever, of the image that you're actually looking for. Which does mean that it has to have some idea, or at least as I think about it, it has to have some idea of, from the top down, where the image is. Especially because we don't have anything like universal namespacing. So in order to then discover that image from those keys, they have to know where it is, basically.
That's the key discovery part that I'm struggling with, because, and I'm not saying struggling like it's a bad thing. Like we want to try to figure out how to solve this. And it was interesting because we were trying to figure out how to uniquely identify stuff in the SPDX group. So, so that we could actually make pointers, and where it'll come up in next week's OCI call. Hopefully that people will, it's next Monday, we're off, right? Next Monday is, I've actually lost track. Okay. So hopefully we'll be able to get the Wednesday meeting set up. We want to be able to have a unique, and the way registries store things with digest gives you that unique identifier. And what I'm getting at is the repo name. I've always struggled with, should a repo name be changeable, or not so much a repo name, but if I have a net monitor image in the Web at Networks registry that they publish it, when I move it over to my registry, technically I can rename it to Web at Net Monitor or something, right? There's nothing technically stopping that. And we haven't built any technology around that keeps that even from the signing. It's still the root digest. But if you think of all the other package managers, people don't rename, I don't think, a package name when they bring it into their private package manager, whether it be NPM, Debian, or whatever. And I'm wondering if we can maintain that concept and set expectations. And sure, if they rename it, fine, but something might break. If you can do that, does that help with some of this discovery? And the reason, and I want to just back up here, especially as we're starting to have these two sets of conversations, I'm really hoping that this isn't like an alternative way of doing what we're trying to do here. Like the conversations we've been having is, we really want to use the principles of what TUF was accomplishing with the security and threat model. We can't figure out how to map it into the ability to have content independently move across registries. So I'm really hoping we have a set of common specs, and this is like an incubation effort to figure out how can we make TUF work. Because the success for me, and I'll just say it's for me is that we get this working and these things merge. Like I want notation in this to be, a merged concept, not, hey, here's 8 ways to do the same thing. And, it's just too confusing. So if we can figure out how to get the scalable is not the right word, the flexibility.
Well, yeah, I definitely think that's one of the things that's on that list, which I think is super important. And I think that in the specification that's on the repo, like it's like early, whatever, there is an initial option, which is basically just that when an artifact moves to a new registry, it is added to the target's metadata for that repository it is added to within that registry. And
this is where the targets
can be done automatically. It can be done using an online key.
Sorry.
What's that?
No, I'm sorry. It depending on microphones and speakers, I'm still Jonathan for the ability to have like dynamic conversations in a room.
I know, sorry.
So the technology is limiting. I apologize. When you're saying the targets, are we still thinking like there's a single artifact in a repo that has a hash of all the stuff that's in that repository?
So that's the snapshot piece. And I think that for the moment, I would propose we defer that piece and we figure out the targets metadata piece, because I think that which includes things like key revocation, it includes things like delegations, it includes discovery, whatever. And I think that piece is a piece that we can solve independently. The goal of the snapshot metadata in TUF is just to provide consistency and rollback protection, which I think are super important as well. But I think that there are things I think we need to talk more about in order to make that work within registries, because like this updatability piece of that, as well as the sharing piece, might be something we need to address. There are proposals that involve transparency logs for the snapshot for the rollback piece instead, which I think could be interesting here. Or some of the Merkle tree stuff that preserves privacy between different repositories within the root. But I think I think it's worth segmenting the conversation a little bit so that we can solve some of these problems without trying to solve all of them at the once.
Yeah. It's the reason I'm pushing on it is we're really close. We're probably going to cut a draft of the artifact spec. And I'm looking for what is there that we're missing. And, if there's some updatability thing that we need to be thinking about, then that's interesting to think about. And I'll give you the example.
Because the timeliness factor is actually really important for any kind of key revocation piece that we add, key revocation or artifact revocation, whatever you want to do with it. Because you need to know which, if it was revoked, you need to know you're seeing the one after it was revoked and not the one before it was revoked. That's just a fundamental, you have to know which one came first and which one is current. And that no one's denial of serving you or showing you an old version that has a vulnerable something. And in TUF, that's related to the snapshot, which is then related to the timestamp. That's how that TUF solves that. Again, I think this is a property we 100% need, but I think it might be worth deferring for a minute so that we can make sure this first piece works, and then we can get that.
Yeah. So going back to the Git Balm discussion we were just having, one of their key values was that they really liked that their thing was single purpose, self-contained, did their one job, did it well. And my goal of looking at what we're doing with TUF is to say, can we take what TUF does, bring it to the registries, but do it as just do TUF, just do the single purpose, and leave all the other stuff of figuring out how to do the signing and all that stuff to the separate Notary, because potentially this could be used by other projects. Other things might want to add TUF to their thing, and so to keep it as a single purpose
so your concept
gives it flexibility.
It's not TUF as a signature thingy. There's some verification.
So TUF isn't really about the signatures. It's really about the metadata about images, which are then signed to provide verifiability. And so I think they could be signed using whatever. It could be signed using notation, as long as it has valid, properties.
Yeah.
So when you say updatability, because this is one of the other pieces that we've struggled with. I know that TUF is used on autos for there's a single stream of updates that goes to that car, right? That's a very logical sequential thing for that thing. I think there was one or two other cases I can't remember, but it's been very much of a stream of continual updates. When we think of content in a registry in a repo, the multiple tags in a repo aren't necessarily correlated as a single stream of updates, because even semantic versioning, it's a string. Semantic versioning doesn't even necessarily work. The one place it does come up is if I make updates to a particular tag. And I've been having a conversation with the Bicep team, which is a way of doing ARM templates, just stronger ARM, just it's a weird name, but anyway, it's the way you do deploying things, resources in Azure. And they've been struggling with the versioning of things. And how do you do updates to a string? And what I was suggesting is they follow this tagging scheme, which is available. It's a by convention, but it's if I have a 1 and don't just colon 1, anything after that is assumed to be star. If I do 1.0.0.0, then that's pinned to that specific thing. What I'm getting at is if I want to keep on pushing updates to :1, right? That specific tag, that is a sequential stream of updates, because now you can guarantee there's a thought process around, I really do want to guarantee that the latest digest that's applied to that tag should be exactly what Tough promises. That seems super interesting. If I have 1 and 2 and 1 alpha and 1 beta, like the concept in alpha and beta are somehow sequential is not something I think customers are actually looking for. I think it's more updates.
I mean, the currentness guarantee that Tough provides isn't just that you have the current version of a tag. I think that's definitely a thing it does do, and it's an important piece, but also make sure that the metadata that you have is current. So like, for example, things like revocation, if ever the metadata changes, you still know that you have the current version of that metadata.
That's what I'm struggling with. What does metadata mean for this type of content?
So metadata means these are the images that I'm signing. Metadata means these are the other keys that I trust to sign this subset of images. Those kinds of things.
Are the keys and the rest of the metadata, what you're signing, are those in the same path or are those separate? Because I haven't looked at the Tough implementation to see, are they like hard connected to each other or not?
Yeah, the way that Tough traditionally works, because it's assuming like a single package manager situation, and this is something that's actually changed in the Notary design, but just for context, the way it usually works is that you have, say, all of PyPI. It's a great example for this. And I know that person X writes beautiful soup or whatever, so I'm going to delegate this key to them, and they can use that to sign that one package image, and they can sign any version of the image. Like they have that namespace, so they could do that plus like version numbers plus whatever. That's their little part of the world. And Tough really work. It can also work with like hierarchies. So you can do like wildcarded. There's a name for them, the Unix style file hierarchy thing. It supports all of that. I think in the context of registries, I totally understand that the file system is obviously not a file system, right? And so the proposal kind of that I have would be to have a root, which could be a registry, it could be larger than a registry, it could be smaller than a registry, and then it delegates each key to a list of repositories on that registry. It can be a single one, it can be a set of ones, and you could do hierarchies that way by delegating to a set that are, say, owned by the same organization, and then that organization can further delegate those. But yeah, it is in the end associated with the location that the images are stored.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that.
Like what you're in, look, you guys can decide how you want to, like, but this is one of those things, like if there's a set of customers that want to do this, for a hierarchy in a registry, and this fits it great. Like I really, I'm not trying to squash that by any means. When you look at registries though, there's very few that actually have more than 2 depths. Like ACR, we took that logical step, and but it also means that if you take something from ACR and push it into some of the other registries that only do 2 levels of depth, that doesn't work. So and because we're really trying to make sure that content can be copied across registries, even within the same company, right, as they promote across different environments. Right, so a dev might be in a physically different registry for no other reason than the domain name is limited to a VNet. So they literally have to put it in another registry because that's another VNet in another environment. So there's a couple different things around that. So all of the hierarchy stuff that's tied to a path in a registry is the part that I'm always struggling with, because I feel like that will overly limit. If you tied it to the hierarchy of those keys, I think you have a great,
But
at least
how do
in
you
my
know
head, a great
keys are
solution that maps
trusted
it.
for? That sounds great, but I just don't know how you would figure out what the key is trusted to sign if it's not somehow tied to where the stuff is that it's signing.
So, and this is where I was kind of looking at how you can have one repository point up and say my parent is this other, because I feel like those two should be separate things a little bit, but also the depth of the repository layout, I don't feel like that's the way you probably want to be looking at this. I feel like you could probably have 2 repositories on the same level with each other in the same, within the same organization, still be nested logically, but not within
clearly
the
they're not
directory
nested.
structure.
But why do we need that? I mean, is this because we're trying to do key discovery? Because if I have content signed by an entity, does where I get the key from have to have anything to do, like, does it have to be in the registry? If the registry has just a place to get it.
And that's where I'm sorting out, does the key structure need to tightly align with the other metadata we're working with, or are those independent from each other? Because if they're independent, then you could say, there's this organization, when we push up a new image for the Acme rocket launcher or something like that, that it then says, okay, Acme development environment, you need to update your set of snapshots for all the stuff that's in the rocket launcher repo, because we need to do the timestamping on everything for a whole organization. So it just kind of goes up a level. So I could see that going on separate from, okay, this is the key that's allowed to sign this. And so that's where I'm sorting out, are they tightly bound or are they loosely coupled?
Yeah, I think that there would totally be a way to do those snapshot timestamp checks, and I'll call it, for in quotes, a separate route, like a separate kind of tree where you check the consistency information, then where you check the key distribution and signing, which is what the targets metadata in Tough does. It does kind of all of that. Yeah, I can totally see that. I think that I'd have to think about it a little bit, exactly how the mechanisms would work, because you do need also consistency of the metadata itself, as well as of the images. In fact, probably more importantly, of the metadata. Yeah, so you have to make sure that the metadata is within some other routes, timestamp checks, but it doesn't have to be strictly tied together.
I think that's the piece that I'm hoping that if we can take the concepts of Tough and break them back down to say those concepts may not work the physical way that these things are structured to registries where content can move, then can we resurrect the ideas in a different structure? Like I don't think with notation, we're not, for what we're gonna focus on right away, you have to figure out a way to get the key. Like, we're just gonna have to punt that because we haven't solved that yet. Most companies don't care. The way that they're going to handle it is they're going to have keys in some key vault, whether it's HashiCorp, Azure, AWS, or some other product, doesn't matter. And as long as an ephemeral client can go get a key from that, there'll be a policy that says which keys, and they'll just manage it. And key revocation for them is the key gets deleted from the key vault.
Which is somewhat unfortunate, because that's kind of that's where a lot of the things have gone wrong with the TLS model of key discovery, is just having a really big list of keys that you trust.
Well, but I think we're differentiating the public ones from what a company does within their environment. Like, they're very.
I guess if it's really well controlled within a company, it's fine. I think for someone like Docker, I just don't think that, I can't see that.
I totally agree. So that's where I'm getting at, is the majority of stuff that we're trying to solve is what customers are trying to do in their environment. And there's only so much trust they can have on public content anyway. Like, it doesn't matter what somebody stamps on something, and I'm not saying we're punting that by any means. We're not there. So my point is, like, the huge priority right now is not solving it, but we have to solve that because there will be content on MCR and Docker Hub and NVIDIA and I'm going between distributors and software companies.
Yeah, I think that's why we have this kind of separate group so that we can ignore that other case and let the other people deal with it, and we can just actually solve kind of the other case.
What I'm trying to say is we do need key discovery. Just because it's not a priority inside of enterprise, it is a problem. But if we can figure out how to do it outside of the registry storage, not just because it's not convenient in a registry, it's that you want a separate entity to trust. Like it's the submarine key thing is like, if I can get the key from the same place I'm getting the content, then I only have to hack one thing. And if we can figure out a way to extract that concept, then I think we're starting to find a solution that just scales across all of these. I don't have an answer, obviously. That's why I keep on coming back to your kind of team that has been thinking about this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what the targets metadata piece of TUF is, and that's kind of why I'm proposing we separate these pieces for now and look at how we can get the targets metadata piece to work similar to how it is now. And then once we have that kind of working and the code's running, we can look at things like the consistency and timeliness properties, which are needed for the full security guarantees, and we can then add those pieces in. I think that to me makes a lot of sense as a way to incrementally implement this, as we also solve these problems with things like snapshot.
Okay.
And I do think that's part of why I'm hoping to implement it. Is I'm hoping that I can, by implementing it, prove to you that the movement across registries can work. I think that's
fair. I'm struggling a little bit because I feel like we're still trying to use existing pieces and implement. But to be completely fair, like we said from the beginning, this is the whole Gaudi model thing. Like build a model. We know it's not complete. And we can make it obvious that there's a tree in the middle of the road. Okay, let's get the road around it and we'll move the tree later, kind of thing, right? And I totally agree. That's why I want to get notation, out of this prototype branch into main, and there's no, set clear examples of, we know this is broken, but test all this other stuff. If it's obvious that's the only broken thing, we'll fix that thing. So if we can do that with you guys, in the space, sorry, not guys, I'm trying, the folks and here, then perfect. And I agree with you. That's part of like splitting them out allows you to focus on how do you solve different parts of the model while we're focused on other folks are focused on different parts of the model. So what do you need, I guess, would be a different way, because that's part of why I'm looping all the way back around and trying to understand what updatability of content that you're looking to solve, because registries do have this today. The 99% of the content is immutable and it's fine, it's digest, blah, blah, blah. Tags are updatable. We're starting to add annotations and other types of things that get added to a registry. And so there's been a bit of a thrashing going on in this one example I put into the artifact spec on annotations as an example, because I can keep on adding just annotations. There's no blobs, there's no config, there's nothing else. All I'm doing is adding a reference type of an annotation. When I get all that data back out, and it's great if all the annotations are unique names, I can merge them all together. If the same annotation is used several times, how do I know which is the right value? Like we don't even have time labeling of content in a registry agreed upon as a standard. And just bear with me for this tangent for a second. What I'm trying to figure out is if there is some kind of updatability of things that we need to keep track of. So there's a sequence to that. And the example, the concrete example was if I am trying to push scan results to a registry, right? So if I'm looking at we'll just use container. If I'm looking at a container image, what are the scan results that says this thing was scanned and it's got this list of vulnerabilities? Okay, I scan it on Monday, I have a list of vulnerabilities. The exact same content, nobody rebuilt the image. On Wednesday, I learn of new vulnerabilities that was actually already in that image. So I'm rescanning it again. If I push another scan result to the registry, how do I know which is the most recent? From a registry perspective, we just see these two references that were added. We don't have any.
And that's exactly, I think, what the snapshot piece of TUF could give you, is it could tell you which of those is the current one, And or even if they're signed, like which of those is currently signed, which of those is just still there, but not.
Right. This
We
signing
find
is
out
somewhat easy. Like if one's signed and one's not, then you just toss the thing. It's not signed. But
But you can see
know,
which signature is newer, basically. You can see like this is the current
what does
valid
newer
one.
mean? That's part of what I'm trying to drill into here is today, yes, the content inside, like even the payload that got sent in the scan result could have a UTC timestamp on it. The problem is the registry doesn't look at the contents. It's like the bank doesn't look in your safe deposit box. You just get a key. The registry is just meant to store content. What is the property that when I ask the registry, give me a list of data the referrers back, what is the generalized concept? It doesn't matter whether it's a notary signature, it doesn't matter whether it's a security scanner result, it doesn't matter if it's Brandon's list of things. What is the thing a registry orders by, filters by, does things by, and has some kind of guarantee of ordering uniqueness? Like that's the semantic that I'm
I think it's
looking
the same.
for.
It's the same problem we're going to have to solve when we start putting snapshots and timestamps up on a registry. We'll have to solve that exact same issue. And yeah, if you ask for a whole list of what are all the objects that match this, and the registry doesn't know to sort them, then we're just going to pull them all back and do it on the client side. And that's not ideal. But then
Horrible.
what that probably means is that you're going to want to have something in there that's going to go through and do some kind of cleanup after the fact. You push the new
That's what I'm
one.
trying to figure out is it's not that registries can't get smarter. Like we're trying to keep them as dumb as possible. Obviously, we're teaching them now to learn how to do references. So is there something about this that we can minimally add that doesn't require some major compute processing or all the data be downloaded?
If you do it server side though, if we put it server side, that means we're not backward compatible at that point, because then whatever solution we build that works with the newer, fancier registries are going to start littering and polluting all the older registries that don't have that automatic cleanup in there.
Honestly, this is, sorry, I'm sounding a little flippant. I don't mean to be flippant. We have to figure out how to identify registries that have newer, even if every registry in the world agreed to this wonderful new feature, it's going to take them time to roll it out. And even if the product and the developers wrote the code for the users and customers that have standalone versions like JFrog and Harbor, right? They're running their own stamp of it on their own VMs. They're going to want to take time to implement it. So we're going to have this inconsistency problem no matter what we do. The concept of backwards compatibility, I don't necessarily buy per se, because it's.
But that's why I'm leaning toward the client side. If you can solve it on the client side, then you don't have to wait for all the registries to be updated and it just works. And the client side solution there is that it just needs to look and say, hey, you know what? I got back 2 results. The second result is 5 minutes old or something like that. There would be something in there that looks and knows, okay, this is the stale one. It's now old enough since the new one got updated that we can now clean it up safely. There just needs to be something in there that we can put on. And then maybe a registry service will say, hey, you don't have to run this separate cleanup job. We'll build it into the registry for you. And so there is that forward progress in there that you're looking for. But I think you can just do this, at least if there is a way to do it client side, then that gives you a path forward.
So I'll give you, and I'm sorry, I'm really not trying to filibuster what you're trying to do, because this is the core. If we can solve this problem, then I think all of this stuff comes together. What you're talking about is kind of what Helm had to struggle with the Helm index. And we're very worried we're coming full circle. The Helm index thing was, hey, on the client, I'm going to create an index and send it to the registry. And every time I push something to the registry, does that index being updated? And the registry conceptually didn't know about this. So there was this concept, bring it to the client, update it, push it back, and it just didn't scale. Like if it was, to your point, whether it was 5 or 10 or even 20 items was no big deal. When it starts to become more, and it is more, right? Everybody is building automation, so they're constantly pushing. So we have customers that have tens of thousands of things in a repo, and some of these things just weren't built the scalability, and they just topple over into horrible deaths. And it's not the small amounts. Like, so what I'm trying to figure out is what fundamental piece do we have? And to your point of incremental, like I'm totally on board with that, but it's kind of like figure out what we want, and then we could figure out what is the backing to get into it. And but I feel like we're so focused on the workaround that we're not actually figuring out what is it that we really want. And then we can back into, okay, how do we get there? You know, if the feature is compelling enough, the users are going to demand it and the registry operators will prioritize the work.
I'm not going to say that I disagree. And when I preface something like that, everybody says, "Oh, great, here it comes." I was going to say, if you come from the other direction and say, "Let's do it from the client side," and this is what we could do on the client side, and this is what we'd like the server to do at that point, then we have that forward progress there of exactly what we can get to. And if it's something where we say, okay, that destination isn't that great and we really need to go a different direction, sure, let's talk about that. But if we look at it and say, hey, if we had a client side tool that just did this query, looked it up, saw the newer one, saw the old one was old enough that we can clean up, we can do the cleanup, and then we can put that server side later on. I think that, it's a solution that could work. And then we know there's a path forward. We know what we want to put on the server side eventually. And so we just got the both answer there. But
we got into a bucket that's so abstract, it's hard to know which ones there are. So I agree. Like even the referrer stuff, you can opt into filtering by artifact type. We've identified something with customer managed keys, double encryption, REST, where we're actually not going to be able to implement in certain cases. So even though if you say I want to filter by notary, you're going to get back all of the reference types. Like we know how to fix it later on, but we've designed this and it's a client optimization. We don't believe there'll be more than a dozen or two in this particular case. Eventually there will be. So I think it's just a concrete example of something. I completely agree with what you're doing. The immutability part is the one that scares the most. If I pull something to the client, I do an update like the index. All the stuff that's based on index is fundamentally flawed. If two build servers, I wouldn't say you and I are build servers. If two different build servers are trying to build something and it goes to the same repo and both are trying to update index and it's updated at the client, it gets the server and they get smashed on top of each other. So how do we figure out what in tough that you need that has this updatability piece to it, and how can we do it where we don't have the collisions?
That's where I'm pushing to make sure we're not relying on tags, because tags absolutely have that issue. And so if we can do this where it is, like we're doing with the reference types and things like that, where everything says we're both it, and then you just do some kind of, collision reconciliation.
So if you push up some kind of metadata thing that is not updated to a particular tag, or you're not updating a single thing at a registry, but you keep on adding a stream, and if there's a way to know some ordinal.
Yeah, you're just querying. So that's one side. The other side is maybe this is something that we just can't push to the registry directly, and it has to go through an external tough server. There is a point we're going to get to there, and that's what I'm trying to sort out with, the discussions here with Marina, is saying, okay, what things can we put in the registry and what things do we just still need that external server to do that reconciliation for us?
Yeah, and that's exactly why I think the targets is a good place to start, because I think root and targets update a lot less frequently and can much more easily go on the registry kind of as is, using one of the artifact spec, whatever that OCI stuff is. And then whereas the timestamp snapshot would require either, I think, maybe another change to OCI, like you guys are talking about, like another way that the registries can deal with that, maybe a separate server, maybe a change to the way we do timestamp snapshot. I think there's a bit of a question there that we need to resolve, for sure.
Yeah, and my thought process there is the snapshots themselves, generating that might be the external server that's generating the snapshot. And so whatever is doing the image push and says, okay, here's my new content that I need to add to Tough. It needs to talk to the notary server, the Tough server, and say, hey, here's the new change to the snapshot. You need to capture this for me. And it says, okay, I'm going to generate the new snapshot. Then there's only one entity that's pushing that data. So you're no longer worrying about that collision at that point. It's handling it for you.
I get, the potential workaround to unblock things. I think I would love, we have lots of workarounds that we use, and we know the workarounds, like the tree in the middle of the road, fine, deal with it later, obvious. Trying to run another service on the side would just be a killer. We talk about adding a feature to it. So I'm not saying that that's a problem. We just finish the thought. So, but if it's done in such a way that we know that this is a total workaround, but if it's designed in such a way that we can incorporate it, that would be awesome. And like the piece that I'm hearing is if we can figure out how to do ordering to the things that refer to something, that might start giving you the piece. And that's something that I'm seeing as might be a common piece. So the fastest we can start getting some of your stuff kind of functional, to identify if we just had this one piece, then we wouldn't need an extra service. We wouldn't need the sidecar. We can just load it in. But it's trying to figure out what those pieces are.
Yeah, I guess I'm starting from the other side, and you know, we'll find a place in the middle here to meet. But I'm starting from I'm not going to get all registries to change overnight, and so what things in Tough do we need to have external just to make it functional? And there's going to be an external server no matter what if you want to do things like the time stamping. You know, that's not going to be something you're going to get to do, have any existing registry server a day to do. We don't want to have the client constantly doing it. Say again?
But there are timestamp servers that users can just use.
I mean, if you're talking TSA, but
yeah, TSAs are different than the way Tough does timestamp. They kind of provide, in some ways, opposite time guarantees. It's weird. Yeah.
And so if you're doing the Tough time stamping, you're going to have a Tough server that's doing that for you. And so once you've got that, okay, what else needs to be there or should be there, at least for the initial design? And then what can we push the registry? And the way I'm trying to draw the line there is, if I was to go onto a registry and just copy dump everything from the registry, mirror it over to another machine, would that work? Would it still be functional? And if I can get a scenario like that, I think we're in a pretty decent place. And it might go stale quickly, and so you got to keep updating it.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the original use cases for Tough actually was trust in mirrors. So you don't have to trust mirrors. You can just copy stuff to a third-party location and then use it directly from there without trusting that third-party location. I think, again, the timestamp is the tricky part of that, but the rest of it does just copy.
Yeah, and so you either have to run another second Tough server to manage that timestamp, or you just constantly update that timestamp, you know, constantly mirror it. Yeah.
Which is the model for package managers, which again is different than the registry, the way they do.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where I'm trying to say, where do we draw the line? What data needs to be on the registry to make that model work? And then if we can get that model work, then we have a starting point, and then we can then say, okay, from this starting point, this is the functionality we were able to make happen with Tough being an external server. And then to Steve's point, what can we now move into a registry so we don't have to maintain an external server? So coming at it from the opposite side from you, Steve, but I hope we meet in the middle somewhere there.
Yeah. I mean, like, how can we make some progress on what's common and what's unique so that you can get your model built and we can say, hey, there's the piece that fits in here. I was pinging the folks on, like, can we get closure on some of the specs and stuff, like the signature spec, and let's just get some of those things converged in, because I don't think that's the pieces. We may have different opinions of we'd like this or that and the other thing, but I'll take a moment to talk about Dizzy if we want. But I don't think those are the fundamental things. Like, it's like, let's just get those.
Envelope doesn't actually so much matter for Tough. I think that there are vulnerable signing envelopes, and that's my concern is mostly that there are signing envelopes that are vulnerable, not so much that they won't work with Tough.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to pick up the kick me sign. I shouldn't have said it when I said I wasn't going to defer. My point is that there's a couple of things that I think are relevant to what we're really trying to solve. And let's get some pieces in there, because while they're relevant to what we're trying to solve, we still need to depend on that thing to be there so we can focus on the pieces that we need, that we're trying to enable. So let's try to get this stuff in place. If you need a sidecar because some functionality doesn't work for now, like, it's not the end of the world. It's just, but let's figure out. I'm hoping we design it and think about it in such a way that it's like the tree in the middle of the road is kind of, it's obvious that it's to move, but it's obvious that it just moves to the side of the road and it's still functional. If there's something about the sidecar that we're building that it's obvious that can go into a registry, it's just not there yet, then that's great. But if it has to be, not has to be, if it's something that it's obvious that it can move and be supported, then we can. And it's just a matter of, hey, we validated that if we just do this one thing or these two things, look at the great scenarios, like, oh, the cost is worth the value. So how do we make those things?
My guess is that it'll probably look a little bit like Notary V1 in that it's not going to be within the distribution spec or any of the other OCI specs, but it will be something that someone like Harbor or some of these other big registries will say, we're just going to run this for you just because it makes sense to us to do that.
Yeah, I mentioned that. I think this is what we're trying to do with the Aura stuff is it is under CNCF, and they are additions that are under a neutral governance. So we're hoping that that's the place that we can make these incubations function. You mentioned something about the artifact spec, like it is under CNCF, it's under Aura. That's where we're going to release it under. We're happy to have it donated to OCI if they want it, but we to your point, we're not blocked by that anymore. We're not, we are going to release this thing, and it's, and we'd love to have the other, whatever the pieces we need, we'll add to that. Okay, so just because we are a little blocked on these pieces, the common pieces we need, and maybe the two of you do or don't care about it, so that is helpful in itself. We do want to get the signature format thing merged. I'll give a 2-minute, there's a couple of minutes left. The thought is that in production, the security folks that will care about our production environments are very critical. And there's some standards that they're not the best, but they're known. At the development side, they're the same security people, like, don't care, it's not in production, do whatever the hell you want. Some of the stuff that I'm seeing with Dizzy is really interesting, and a lot of the in total work and all that. And that's like to the left. It's in the the down to the left. The downstream upstream doesn't work in this. To the it gets into the thing gets deployed. I'm hopeful that the security people don't care about that environment as much, will allow Dizzy and the other things to evolve to a point that have a set of libraries, get the conformance and all the other checkboxes that the production security people are okay with. The problem is that because these are production deployed assets, we haven't been able to get the approval to be able to use some of these things. So what I'm hoping is Notary, which really focuses on distribution and production environments, will use the JWS and PKCS7, I think is the stuff that that they're narrowing down on, as the envelope and all the stuff that's going on with Dizzy matures and gets that level of certification, then we can evolve Notary to start using that. What I'm getting at is I was really hopeful we can get the Dizzy stuff. We can't get the crypto folks to sign off on it. The customers are just saying, we won't use those for this list of things. And I'm trying to get those lists of things in these discussions so that all the folks working on that know exactly what they need to finish before the production security, stampers will approve it. If we can get the stuff that's been narrowing on that signature format into the Notary project, then I think it's the piece that we're not really fundamental to what we're trying to solve, but we have to have that there. We can start building. Like the notation, the NV2, what was NV2, had a signature that it was using, and we're able to focus on all the other scenarios. If we can get those things merged, I think you will have the pieces that you need to focus on what we need to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can even skip the signature piece for now. Again, it's way more about generating the metadata and getting that working, and we can put the signature piece in there afterward whenever we figure that out.
Great. So I'm just trying to, I'm afraid we're going to continue to thrash on that one, and we're never going to get it merged, and it's really hard to make any other progress because some of these foundational pieces can't get merged. So I guess part of this is making a pitch. Can we get that stuff merged without
to your concern on thrashing? Does it make sense just have this is the way we make decisions according to the governance model within the Notary project? Just use that. There needs to be a decision-making process, just follow through, and this is how we're going to make a decision on this stuff. I think the big concern, the reason a lot of it is thrashing, is that we didn't follow that. We just kind of came in and said, okay, we decided here's the answer, we're going to go this direction. The community just kind of said, wait, what? So if we've got the governance model there that says this is how we make our decision, just go through that, and then I think we can make some progress that way.
The governance model is there. I'm trying to, I don't want to discount people that are not in those owner spots to, feel like their voice isn't being heard. Like we do have it. At the end of the day, we can say, thank you. This is what, we're moving forward. I'm trying to not use that more than I don't want to have to be like the thank you, go away thing. I'm really hoping that we can agree that, all right, this isn't perfect. Perfect is the blocker to not making progress.
But I think there is open up, say community, this is what we're thinking of, this direction we want to go. And do you agree? Give some thought in there. But then at the end of the day, the way we make our answers there is with the governance model. And so we just say, okay, this is the decision-making process. Hey, speak of the governance. Did your time clock get offset by an hour, Justin? Because this
was my fault. I put the thing on the calendar at the wrong time slot. So I figure what I can do is I can catch people up. We can make a little progress, see how it goes. My apologies to everybody involved.
I think you're an hour behind, Justin. I'm sorry. We were just
What?
about to wrap up.
No,
Are
it's okay.
you?
So
Oh.
like I was saying, this is my fault. I put the
Oh.
calendar at a different time than the Slack. So I'm happy to stick around, catch people up, and just make sure we end on the same page, and we can even have a little more whatever. So it's my fault. So I apologize.
Have we managed to get it onto the CNCF calendar yet? And also, is this going to be the time going forward? Because
The previous
I-
hour was the time going forward. Like you.
Yeah, that was a quick thought. We totally can talk about that more though.
unfortunately, though, I have a permanent conflict on the hour before. It's our engineering staff meeting. So
Okay.
I can do this hour, so it,
So maybe my mistake hour was a better one.
it's funny because
Happens
when I
sometimes.
joined, it was just me, and then Pritesh joined, and it took a couple of minutes, and then so. All right,
It was right after the tag security supply chain. So Marina and I were just
yeah.
frantically listening to interesting stuff that was unrelated to this. Oh, everybody's showing up now at the other side there.
Yeah, with my messed up invite. Apologies. Okay.
Trishank, we messed up the meeting. Everybody's showing up. It's just we're wrapping up.
Yeah, so I think what I figure is I can catch everyone up, and if folks want to stick around, we can have a little bit more discussion, and people can catch up whenever, and we can make sure to actually do this correctly next time.
Yeah, it'd be good if you can. Well, it'd be good if you could just run by it while it's still fresh before I can
Yeah.
catch
Okay.
up
So
with
yeah.
the
So what we've
recording
been
later.
talking
But
about so
the
far.
longer we
is-
have this meeting,
Yes.
we can't have the recording. But
So yeah. So I made a HackMD for notes, which is a little bit bare bones at the moment, but I'll fix that sometime this week. And I'll cross-link the two HackMDs at some point. We kind of figured all that out. I mentioned there was an issue in the Tough Notary repo that I opened that I'm trying to collect some of these concerns that have come up at various times throughout this process about ways that Tough and registries interact. And it'd be great to get more of those listed there so that we can kind of figure out what pieces we need to talk more about and figure out, and what pieces we should start implementing and see if they work.
do we want to split them out? Because some of those came from, I think, some things that I sent to Justin at some point. But I was originally going to open them like one issue per thing,
Yeah,
so we
I
could.
think I say eventually I want to put them each in an issue. I figured I can collect them, then open the other issues and close this collection spot. If it makes more sense to just open issues, I'm also happy to do that. I don't know.
Is it, well, yeah. Some of them have some interrelations, but lots of them are actually quite separate, and it probably makes it easier to schedule and link discussions and.
Okay, yeah, I can do
resolutions
that
and things
then.
if they're- yeah, I mean,
And we get that working. And then I talked briefly about how I think a lot of the concern points.
you could like still leave an overall issue that points at the other ones as a epic issue. So that
Yeah, it's like
I guess
this is
both.
all the things we need to solve for V1.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We could check the checklist or something. But yeah, they talked about how a lot of those issues relate more to the snapshot and timestamp pieces of Tough than the targets pieces. And so kind of my proposal is that we start with getting some targets metadata onto some registries and see how that, see what breaks. And then solve the kind of timeliness and consistency pieces as like a step 2 of that kind of implementation as we talk more about how to do that correctly. And then we had a whole discussion about this idea of updating on registries and how that's a huge piece of the challenge for that timestamp snapshot part. I think Brandon's idea is to have a separate service, at least, to start, that can collect snapshot and then manage that there. I think Steve has a bigger, broader vision of fixing everything in registries, which I think is also a good end goal. I hope I'm summarizing that well.
Not grandiose at all. It just solve world hunger.
I mean, I think the issue of running services, yeah, I think if they can be, I mean, if things can be prototyped running out of the registry, it's easier to prototype. I mean, part of the problem with Notary V1 was that you had to run it in order to have the service working at all. And there wasn't an implementation that you could run if your registry didn't have support, in effect. And even if it's more convenient if like timestamp server is built into your registry, technically, as long as you have the right permissions, you could always run an external timestamp server as long as yourself doing the update. So I think it's worth definitely from the prototyping point of view, it makes it easier to do it without also having to build a registry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Although, I mean, it's definitely worth discussing which things it makes sense to build in or not. But I mean, I think because there's a very large range of registries that are you can technically run a registry as a dumb HTTP server if you really want to. It's as your container registry and does lots of other things as well as being a registry, like mirroring content between regions and stuff like that, which there's a very big range of what registries do right now.
Yeah, so just for prototyping, we kind of get it a little bit more local and then see how it goes from there.
And as much as Steve wants to see everybody have the most up-to-date registry, I see a lot of them that just don't quite implement the spec the way it should be, even with the spec as it is today. And so I'm just imagining every time we add a new feature, the bifurcation of everybody going different directions as to how much the spec they implement. So the more that could be delegated to something you can run yourself if you need to, that makes it easier for me.
Well, who says the thing you're running is not going to get out of sync also? I mean, it's like just shipping the 1.0 is the easy part. It's actually trying to add things over time. So I think it comes down to one, if specs are really solid and describe what it is they do and don't do really well. And then there's a compelling reason why customers, products, and services you would upgrade. If I add some random feature that nobody cares about, nobody's going to implement it. If we add something that's pretty critical, what people need, customers will make a demand and ask registries to implement the capability. So I think it's always finding that value for the cost. And that's why, if anything, that's why I keep on trying to get these core concepts that enable lots of scenarios, because you pay one and you feed lots. Instead of killing birds, you feed lots, I guess that's the better analogy. So anyway,
as far as I guess goals for this group, I guess the kind of large action items. I think this is initial meeting. I don't think we can put this all in like today or whatever, but is to, I think, better define the goals for that project. And most of that I think involves copying some stuff from the other project and rearranging it, whatever, to define the goals for this piece of the project, and maybe at the same time define the pieces of the goals that are for the notation part of the project and see where we fit in. And then I think my other kind of action item goal would be to just get the start of some code into our repo, just to start playing with, whatever state it is in. I can get maybe some initial commits, and people feel free to play around with it. Looking at, I think to start, I'm going to look at getting, just getting stuff working, but then getting targets metadata associated with artifacts. And then so just the targets made with artifacts, and then we can start working on, key hierarchy within targets metadata and that piece. And yeah, that was the other thing we talked about a little bit, is delegating targets only down to the repository level instead of the individual image level, to kind of avoid issues with delegating to lists of hashes, which I know came up in the Notary meeting yesterday as well, and kind of got me thinking a little bit about that and how it doesn't seem very scalable to say a key is trusted for this entire list of individual hashes of images, because obviously as soon as any one of those hashes or anyone uploads a new image, it is not going to be on the list of hashes. So the repository level might make more sense as a base, at least to start, of the delegation.
Yeah, I don't, I can't think of any use cases. The bring out hashes does, bring up the other issue of with Notary V1, you can't do anything to something that's it has to be tagged. So talking of hashes, so untagged we've had a few requests, not very many, to be able to sign things that just have hashes and not names. It's a bit of a weird request in many ways that I don't
Yeah, because
think
if
necessarily
you know the
matters.
hash, I mean, I don't know. Anyway, there's
Yeah,
always some-
exactly. It's if you know the hash,
That's-
you know that's
that's
a
what
reference to
V1
a piece
gave
of
you.
it's a reference to a piece of content, so like it's okay. But people sometimes said that they wanted that, but yeah, whether it's not, I don't think it's an important use case initially. But it
So maybe
was
that's another thing we should
just because
discuss
you
whether
mentioned
we
list of
want that.
list of hashes, and it reminded me because
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that'll come up, and when we talk about some of the other issues, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the tag signing piece, I think mostly works in, we can steal kind of some of that logic from Notary V1, right? That specific piece of it, the tag signing and all of that. But I do think it sounds like there's interest in also supporting the hash signing. So I think we may as well just include that in the implementation.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue with V1 was that technically there was a different namespace between unsigned and signed content, because the registry itself, you could pull Nginx latest and get a different thing from if you pulled it with Notary, because it
Yeah, if you
uses
said
different-
use Notary, you got one thing, and use don't use
yeah,
Notary,
which
you
is
got something.
very confusing, and I think
Yeah.
that's a case where ideally we would potentially have to make registry changes in order to handle that. Although, I mean, or anyway, or let's discuss
I
the
mean,
trade-offs.
Does it
If
make
we-
sense to reverse that and say, instead of Notary, what is the latest tag pointing to, and then pulling that, reverse the logic and say registry, what is the latest tag, get it back, and Notary, does this match what I should be getting? And that way you just
Depending on how
give
you
that.
do that, that's part of.
I think either that, or I think you could upstream that piece of Notary to the registry and have the registry, have the use the whatever tough metadata in order to do the tag resolution to make sure it always matches.
Well, that's what I mean by embed it in the registry. Yeah, and embed
Yeah.
it in the registry so that the registry. But there's some issues with that in terms of like currently tags are basically don't have any metadata associated, so it's difficult. I did discuss with Derek a while back, when early on in this process, about adding metadata to registry tags, because they're basically like the original Git tags, lightweight tags, basically kind of useless, and everyone switched in Git to using real tags because you could do things like sign them, and it's exactly the same issue. Basically, registries have effectively lightweight tags with no metadata. They're just a pointer, and therefore they're not really any use for anything like this. And so I think it's exactly analogous to the Git situation, where basically now, if you read the Git, it's like there's another kind of tag which we don't really use anymore, but it's in the documentation to be extra confusing.
I don't
I've
want
thought
to
of going
use a
back-
hammer for everything, but is it possible the reference type could be a new document for tags?
Technically, it points at a hash, not a tag, at the moment. But
yeah, I haven't thought all the way through. As I said, it just okay.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I was thinking that the tag API itself, I've been thinking about putting requests in there to make it return a digest instead of just that one tag name when you do like the listings, which would give you, return the entire descriptor. And so that would give you annotations and other things on there, but that is still on the target manifest object itself. That's not, probably missing some other things there. Although the more I think about it, you probably could put annotations in there in the tag itself. So maybe.
Lifting annotations is a challenge. We actually had that in artifacts, so we pulled it back out.
Because annotations are like arbitrary, right? You can put anything in there.
You can, it's just what I think Brandon's talking about is you kind of lift it up from a manifest into the descriptor to return the results.
Yeah, I mean, it's a descriptor pointing to the manifest itself. And so I was thinking that was originally what was in the manifest, but it's not. It's actually a layer above that. So you could potentially put annotations in there, and that's where you could put your metadata in at that point. That would be an interesting question for the OCI people.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense to me because then we could do it in registries today without any of the additional pieces. I mean, I think the garbage collection piece could be problematic, but otherwise we could just do it in registries today.
Well, I can always say otherwise, like, yeah, other than the fact that it'll all get deleted, it'll be fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, 'cause the problem is it's not actually defined how they do the garbage collection. So, you know, there's probably some percentage of registries it would just work for.
Well, some of them don't do garbage collection, so yes, they always work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but okay.
Right.
Some states don't have lots of cops, so you can just kill anybody you want.
How do they scale if they never collect garbage?
The user has to do it. So
They
the
don't have
customer,
enough usage.
like it's basically you push the stuff, you put it. The main distinction is around whether customers have independent storage, and I mean I think partly the reason that Docker Hub has garbage collection is because it has a lot of public content with a lot of duplicates and a lot of ephemeral stuff and things like that. So, and a lot of people pushing the same stuff. So I think people thought it made sense. And we don't have segregated storage for different customers. So it all sits in one gigantic S3 bucket, which arguably is, is somewhat a legacy of history, and we might not do that if we started again now. But because having one S3 bucket with everything in is kind of painful.
As one of
It's
those
a-
users
it's a-
putting up Docker Hub, I'm sorry.
It's a big bucket, and you're a small droplet in it.
But to Trasank's question, I think a lot of my clients start off with just a registry without any garbage collection. They find out they need garbage collection usually a year or so into it.
Most is the distribution.
Yes. So
have it. So
GitLab had that problem. They built a registry without garbage collection and spent a year retrofitting garbage collection to it afterwards.
It's just that the reference implementation doesn't have it, and everybody's trying to prove that their product is valuable before you worry about cleaning up. Like the dirty secret is ACR didn't have any GC for 1 or 2 years either. It wasn't until we had a shitload of storage that we had to go. Actually, it wasn't even just that. We had customers that said, when I delete stuff illegally, I need to actually make sure it goes away. So like, okay, it's time. And yeah, but it wasn't that we didn't want to do it. It wasn't the most important thing, right? It's behind the scenes. Nobody sees it until somebody says, "Did you really delete it?" Like,
Yeah. So I guess the question I have out of this whole discussion is adding tough metadata to the registry, like, do we need to talk about this at the OCI level, or is there a way for us to do this without them even knowing about it? I mean, not without them knowing about it, but with, effectively without them knowing about it. But would that not work because of things like garbage collection?
It should be fine. Like the model's pretty general, so it should just work. With you might want OCI artifact support in the registry, but I don't think there's anything that requires any additional thing that's different about it.
Okay, so maybe that would be like a step 2 if
it all depends on the implementation. Let's get further and let's figure out what they got.
There might be size issues for manifests. That's the only thing, because there are limits for manifest size, so which are not defined. I mean, they're. I don't know what our limit is.
It's I think container D is 8 megs, but bunch of the registries are 4. But except Quay, who decided to be 1.
standards.
That's plenty of metadata, tough metadata. The only problem, the only thing where that might be a problem is snapshot. And by then, I would argue even 8 megs, like that's a pretty large snapshot. Then you're gonna need to do something else.
I feel like if you get that
you
big for your
don't-
manifest,
I don't think you realize how much stuff we have in our registries.
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet somewhere where I calculated it. I think snapshot is actually a problem, but that's why we have
How
all
big?
these other
How
policies.
big is it?
I'm
If
gonna
you do
pull
it
up my spreadsheet.
naively.
Let me
Yeah.
see.
while
I
you're
mean-
looking that up, I think that's kind of a reason that you want to move that actual data to a blob instead
Yeah.
of the manifest just going to point to it.
Oh, yeah,
But it's logically it's not a blob. That's the problem because it points
Oh.
to the items and it points to other it points to real objects.
Oh, right. It's not a leaf, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
it is
not-
a leaf, and a leaf can end up pointing to right. I see what you're saying.
You
Alright,
do like a
let's
multi-tiered
see.
index. You can have an index point to an index.
Yeah, you can do
It
you
is,
can do
it
things
is
like
valid
that.
in the spec.
Yeah.
That actually might scale nicely for the snapshot data since what it's trying to do. I'm sure someone will not like that when you have an index point to an index, but that would make a really effective tree structure for your manifest at that point.
Yeah, if we're doing the Merkle tree thing, yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the snapshot is just the pointer to the very top of that, and then whatever changes, you only have to change that one branch.
Marina, any numbers?
Yeah, I wrote this spreadsheet and I'm having trouble reading it. Give me a second.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it was in the gigabyte range though.
Okay.
Gigabyte of
That's-
data for the snapshot. I'll have to be curious what's going in there.
Oh, it's the thing is, it's just that there were a lot of images. The snapshot size per image. Here, there's a bunch of numbers in this spreadsheet. I don't know. I'm having trouble reading my own spreadsheet, so probably won't be able to either. But
So this is the number of repos, right? Not images.
this is the number. Well, it has the number of images. Well, which then relates directly to the number of targets metadata files, which are the ones actually listed in snapshot. So the number that matters is the number of targets metadata files.
Yes,
which
yeah.
that correlates directly to the number of.
Repos, yeah. What I call repos, yeah.
Constants. This will give us the. Yeah, so estimated public snapshot size is this number of bytes. I need to convert it.
Could you share your screen? Because I don't know
Yeah,
which
it's
part of the
it's
screen.
300 million bytes.
380 million. Okay.
If we like naively. This is why there's some of that other work to not do that, because obviously that number is a problem.
But that's based on a number of images? Where
That's based on some numbers that Justin Cormack gave me that have to do with Docker. It's like some
Docker Hub.
estimates, basically.
It's like 10 million repos, basically.
Yeah, and I make some kind of generous assumptions too, and it still has that many. So I think it's,
Yeah, but kind of going back to the Merkle tree design, if it was some kind of hierarchical, then you could have this thing, you could distribute that workload effectively.
Exactly,
So
that's the whole idea of
each
the Merkle
repository would be.
tree is you wouldn't have any one file that big. You'd have a bunch of small files,
Right.
and you wouldn't have to download all of them. So
Yeah, and so if the snapshot itself is an index point to indexes, point to more indexes, you could walk that at that point.
yeah, so I think in the snapshot Merkle tree version is also in the spreadsheet somewhere.
You might want to clean up those old Merkle trees after a point, say a year or so. So you need to keep references to all of
Yeah.
them.
That I think is one downside.
That's what the garbage collection will do
Yeah.
for you. That's the good thing about a garbage collection is you don't have to think of a strategy for cleaning this up.
I
Whereas if
see.
they-
So if we
it's
do
in
it
garbage-
right, I see.
Yeah.
As long as we have like references to the things while they're there, and then we remove them when we have the new Merkle tree, it should disappear.
Magically just work. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Should being probably a keyword there. Yeah, so that's definitely one piece of it we'll have to think more about. Yeah, I think the Merkle tree addresses a lot of the size concern there, but then it adds a little bit of complexity, which is then, its own problem. And I'm working actually on another proposal that uses, I'm trying to compare the snapshot Merkle tree computation time to computation time using this thing called an RSA accumulator, which is like a Merkle tree, but using RSA, just to see if we can get the computation time piece of it down to something more reasonable. But anyway, that's kind of an all in
Surely
aside.
RSA is slower than SHA-256.
Well, the question is a single exponentiation slower than a lot of hashes? Because the RSA accumulator, you can do one single exponentiation for an infinitely sized tree with a lot of multiplication versus all of that. I suspect it might still be slower. I just want to prove that it is.
My guess would be, because now that, given that SHA-256 is done in hardware on new hardware now, quite universally, whereas RSA is not.
Yes.
So I suspect that the kind of constant factors would eat up the difference, probably.
And regardless, that's kind of more of a future aside than it is like an actual practical point.
There might be some computation versus storage trade-off there, or is it same? Is it the same for both?
The storage, I'd have to look at some numbers. I think it would be similar because most of the actual storage is just the actual snapshot information, just put in different places. The total amount of storage is going to be similar no matter how we store it.
Ah, I see. So
Whether or
even with the
not-
RSA accumulators, you're not doing any sort of clever encoding. I thought you were encoding the version numbers as the keys as primes.
You do have to do that to compute the tree, but you still like when I pull an image, I still need to know the actual version number of that image.
Oh, so the storage, underlying storage, still the same. I see.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, although you don't have to pull all the nodes of the tree, I guess, which is a different. Anyway, this is all probably irrelevant to this discussion. But yeah, so that's the snapshot piece. So I think that's the only place we'd ever run into the multiple megabyte problem.
Yep.
I think targets metadata could get big if you design it badly, but we can just not design it badly, and that should be fine.
I think that's also assuming that you would have one snapshot for all of Docker Hub. And it may actually come down to Docker Hub says, look, we'll have the official library images under one snapshot, and then everybody that's doing their own repository might have their own snapshot for their organization structure.
Yeah, that's something I thought about a lot, especially because I know Steve has a big concern about sharing image hashes across private repos. So I think that if you're a private organization, I think running your own, or like, a client up or whatever, you can have your own snapshot piece that you use for those kind of private ones, which makes a lot of sense.
We're thinking about a proposal for tough where sometimes you don't need a snapshot. In this case, I agree you need snapshot for things that absolutely have dependencies. We need to make sure that, so the official images have dependencies on each other, right? They might.
No.
Python, for example.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Not really, no. I mean, that's the thing. I think it's one of the things we should discuss. But technically, no, none of the images have dependencies.
What about Python and Alpine, for example?
What about them?
Isn't that a dependency? So if I install Python, but it's built already.
So the image itself
Yeah,
doesn't
pulling
have the
them.
dependency. Yeah, it's
There's
when
no
it copies-
runtime. There's no visible runtime dependency.
You need it for the build time, though. You're right. For
Yeah,
installing
build
and
time.
running it, you don't need it. For build time, you need it.
Build time, it'll pull. Thanks,
Yeah,
Steve. Build time, it'll pull all those layers in at that point.
but
You
you've
know, you'll
already.
say
I mean, you've already
initial.
built it. You've already built it at the time that you've got the image. So
No,
it's
I
kind
agree. But that's what I'm trying to say. During build time, those dependencies are important. You want to know what the latest version of the tags are, right? It needs to be consistent.
I don't think for our stuff we can.
Again, it's complicated. We'll have to have a longer discussion about this. I'd say I'd say it's complicated.
I would say that the build server itself, when it has Notary enabled, it would do that verification that its version of Alpine it's pulling is the correct version. But then when you push up, you're pushing up, okay, I built my version of, whatever else on top of it, PHP or something like that on top of Alpine. You're then saying this is my version at that point.
Yep, exactly. And then Python and Alpine are completely separate. They don't depend on each other anymore when you're pulling.
Correct.
So then, Marina, it's conceivable that in some use cases, we probably don't even need the snapshot. But then the question becomes, how do you do the update workflow? Because it completely changes.
The update workflow is a little bit different. I mean, the update workflow honestly is about 50% the targets piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as long as you get some measure of consistency, not so much of images, but of metadata, just to make sure, and timeliness, to make sure that if something is revoked or the keys themselves are changed, you can see that. That's the level of, that's the consistency that you need, more so than the consistency of the images.
Yeah, the huge value of snapshots to me is that you're only time stamping one small thing. And the timestamps is what's going to be constantly iterating. And so if you can only have to timestamp one small thing, that really reduces the load on the registry.
Yeah, I guess more so than consistency, it gives you that timeliness without having to have a time.
The timeliness, exactly. I think is more important because Marina, even if the delegations, if you're installing Python and you don't depend on Alpine anymore, not after build, do you care what version it is? You only care about the latest version of.
You can detect rollbacks in images that aren't the ones that you're downloading.
Rollbacks, right.
The Mercury paper, yeah.
That's where the Merkle tree might come in. You don't need to do it proactively all the time. When you install Alpine for the first time, then you check maybe compared to a previous point.
Yeah,
right?
so that's exactly like a transparency log with Tuft can give you the rollback, actually universal rollback protection, which is kind of even cooler than Mercury. Because basically the first time anyone looks at it, it's then added to the transparency log. And you can see that if anyone anywhere sees a rollback, you can then detect it based on this log.
So Trishak, what are you trying to solve on that though? Because I'm thinking new version of Alpine comes out today. That shouldn't invalidate everybody that's doing Python right now.
No, it shouldn't. Yeah, exactly. For installation, it shouldn't. For build, maybe it does.
Build, yes.
I think that
you'll rebuild from the newer one.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, for example, like the Alpine targets metadata or whatever it is could list both versions. It could list this version we're still saying is good. This version is the new version released today. Both of these are valid. We're signing this. It includes both.
Well, that's the other one of the other issues on the thing, which is that literally no one has ever deleted anything from a registry, and every version is in there. And with Notary V1, we did exactly that, and we marked them all as good because
I see.
The only way of not doing that was to basically delete them, and no one ever deletes anything because it's an archival store as well. So there's a big issue. So we have 2,573 versions of Python in Docker Hub. And we do have some that are no longer tagged and effectively deleted as well. But the vast majority of them, and the vast majority of use cases, nothing is deleted. And this is a big problem because it means that fundamentally it's not the user does not frame this in a sense as an update problem, and it causes a lot of issues, and it's it caused and I mean my view of it is it's partly because again, like I like my Git comparisons. Effectively, we only have one kind of tag for branches and for tags, and everyone's very confused about what they are, and we don't kind of visibly store history properly. Brandon, I've actually forgotten the exact number. I looked at it the other day because someone asked, and it was something around that, but I forget the exact number. 2573 though is a port number for something, isn't it? Docker or something? I can't remember.
2475.
I can't remember. Anyway,
But regardless, so I think that once
But
the
so that I think there's a big there's a usage problem that versus the update model, which is a big problem from that point of
yeah,
view.
because I think there's a way to use the targets metadata to keep like the current X versions, like, you know, these ones are all still valid, we still
Yeah,
validate
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah.
Or even to have
But-
two different targets rules, one of which says, these are the ones that are still secure, these are the ones that people are using.
But right
and-
now, there's no way for any of us to tell which of those things are, and there's no way for the user to indicate that any intent, or the
Interesting.
publisher to mark any intent.
Oh, so I guess that's the key, is we need a way for users to have stuff in the registry but not signed, basically. So to say this is too old, but we still have it up there, but we don't want it in our metadata anymore.
I think that's not what Justin is saying. I think Justin
Well,
is
I mean,
saying
that's
there's no. Sorry, go ahead.
that's one way. I mean, I think there's several ways. We have to induce a behavior change if, in order to do something that's different from the current behavior has clearly become just leave everything in the every version in the registry and externalize the choice of which one you use to other mechanisms which are outside the registry, unfortunately.
One good thing we can do is we can start associating ages with everything we sign as part of the sign metadata. So then people can make their own decisions if they want.
Oh yeah, you could have like customs metadata or whatever that says this image
Yeah.
was first published in 2012, maybe you shouldn't use it.
Correct. And even if you keep re-signing it, you keep accumulating the ages and then you can decide. Cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to think about, because that really, I think it's more so a behavior problem than it is a technical one. I think people need to eventually stop.
Well, it's technical in the sense that the registry doesn't have a semantics for it, I think. So that but it's, and that's kind of enforced the behavior to some extent. I mean, I think I know there's a lot of, it's interesting how it became so different from package managers. I think the reason is that package managers couldn't afford to stop all the old binaries because they didn't have venture capitalists funding them. And we did, so we didn't delete them. And it's entirely it's entirely our fault, probably. And there's probably some, kind of reason, because like, your Debian mirror, like you asked people to mirror a Debian and they would not mirror the history of Debian back to Debian. Even Debian didn't mirror that until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when they created the historic Debian archive that does have everything, but they don't let you use that because it's too slow to actually use it on a day-to-day basis. But there's a bunch of separate design decisions in registries combined with the availability of Amazon S3 and kind of things like that basically changed the calculation about keeping history and basically caused a fundamental difference in how users thought about it and how the design was. So I think these things are kind of, as a kind of historian, I find these things kind of fascinating about how different types of behavior arose from what could have been similar changes. I mean, the other thing we managed to do was not get people to update their containers in place, and but that we basically, those were two big changes in behavior that we drove, and I think some of them were more they were driven by different kind of accidents and intentions, and somehow you get a limit of the number of things you can change when you introduce a new technology, and it's quite small. But a lot of it, in a sense, I think wasn't that carefully designed up front. It was approximately designed. I mean, the whole registry as a content address store only happened later, because originally it was not content addressed. It had random IDs until there was a enormous security vulnerability, which is kind of obvious in retrospect. I mean, this was just when I started at Docker. I think it was in the process of being fixed, and so it shifted to content addressing. But because you could basically use the same hash as the base image for Alpine as something else and poison someone's local cache, and then they would run that instead of Alpine. Oops. So the whole thing was reworked to be content addressable over a period of some months in a very secretive and emergency kind of way. So yeah, it wasn't all planned correctly up front, but it's become harder to change things now because people are used to it.
Yep.
It's definitely fundamental.
I think Microsoft also learned that the hard way with Windows. So cool. Is there anything else we should talk about? When's our next meeting? All that good stuff.
Yeah, I think that the meeting time thing is a bit up in the air. I know that this meeting time is like, it's too late for a lot of Europe people.
Yeah.
It's okay. This is the last slot I do meetings normally. It's a little late for France, but I don't know if we've got anyone.
Yeah, and then of course I did the whole
for
thing where I
content.
messed up the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we're 1 hour. We're 1 hour better than the rest of Europe for talking, which is useful. Us and Portugal are good.
Yeah.
Everyone else is too far over.
Okay, so I guess we can do this hour for now, and then see if we get enough complaints to send out another doodle.
I mean, if 12 to 1 worked, great. If not, 1 to 2 is fine with me.
It looks like we had, I don't know if Justin Cormack has a hard.
I can't make it. I have a regular meeting, and
that's 12 to 1. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do 1
maybe
to
1
2.
to 2. Yeah, maybe we can try that next week, and then
see how it works. Yeah,
exactly.
And then people will arrive at 2, and then we'll do 2 to 3. And then...
Yeah, exactly. We'll just slowly push it all the way into the night. And we can do a lot of this work, I think, offline as well, and doing GitHub discussions and all of that. So
sure.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to
Brandon. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Extra long recording for people to see if they get to the end.
Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me. All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.